Well, first of all, let me thank everyone, and particularly Yolanda and Vicky, who organized this fantastic meeting. And to be honest, a couple of weeks ago, I received a very important invitation, and that's why I thought it was so important to benefit from being with all of you, researching this topic. And our Senate in the Chilean Congress organized a group of people, and they want us to advise them in developing the new policy on immigration. And it's the current government pushing in that direction, and we bring together people from different institutions, different disciplines. And I told them about this meeting, and they are expecting to read and learn from all your presentations. So I really invite you to deliver them, because I'm now responsible of bringing the new ideas, right? So I feel more committed to, but also very responsible with this issue, and because obviously the influence that we academics can make in public policy. The work that I'm presenting now is, as the title suggests, a combination of the two major traditions in intergroup contact and acculturation. As you will see in my presentation, this work hasn't been strongly addressed in the literature as we were expecting because of the close relationship that might be between acculturation research and contact. And obviously, the long title is also reflecting the big group of people that we've been working in this project. As you can see, it's a lot of my folks related to this contact theory and research in acculturation, including Rupert and Linda that are here, my fellow collaborators for many years in trying to understand contact situation in the Chilean context. As we know, these tremendous social psychologists influence all of us in many respects in regard to understand how contact could be positive. But not just him. There are a lot of people, lucky us, because they've been dedicating years and years trying to make sense why and how contact is good for us. We certainly have learned many things. First, that group contact did produce a positive effect on reducing prejudice, but particularly when the optimal condition that Porter display in his fantastic book is particularly present. And Linda and Tom give us this fantastic reward to the literature showing how important contact is. But particularly important is being the role of friendship. Being friendship, probably the condition that bring together all this optimal situation, equal status, the opportunity to get to know each other, work in a positive and collaborative way. So friendship tell us very importantly that the more we get friends from our group, the more we develop positive intergroup attitudes. It's a lot of studies and just a simple recollection of them. But friendships also work partly because it reduces anxieties, feeling of threat, and by that way, we can benefit from contact experience. There's been research in cross-sectional study, experimental study, longitudinal study. It's a very well-established area of research, as you know. So let's see some examples. And I really like the study of Tom Pettigrew in this European journal in which he shows how mixed neighborhoods provide opportunities for people to become friends. Sounds obvious, but not having the opportunity, as Patrick was showing, could also dilute the effect of positive contact. And contact was negatively related to friendship. Though he already pointed out the idea that prejudice could also reduce our disposition to become friends. So this bi-direction idea is really important to consider. We are going to consider in the study here. We also have evidence in Chile, particularly regarding the group that we are interested in this study, in which you can see that friendship is also influencing significantly. Well, this is negatively related to prejudice regarding the Chilean sample, and it meant by reducing threat and anxiety. Very common finding in the literature. But that's happened also for the Peruvian sample. Those are Peruvians, immigrants living in Chile, adult, more than 300 participants, and again, the same pattern. So friendship, at least in this particular context, bring positive news. But as we know also in the literature, there is another form of contact which is indirect and is the role of what we call as extended contact. Extended contact is based on the idea that observing others, how much my friends develop a relationship with our group member, could also be relevant for changing attitudes. So the mere knowledge that my friends, my in-group fellow members, have contact with other out-group may impact on the way I feel, I think, and behave towards them. So the contact is one story. The indirect contact could also add value to these studies. So this effect is being very important across different samples, across different contexts, adults, adolescents, young children. The more they have in-group who have friends or contact with our group, they also can benefit from that. So this is really important because that is effect of extended contact could also benefit from direct contact. So if I live in a place in which I'm not particularly related to our group, but I have friends from my network, having friends, that could also influence my interaction with them. So extended and direct contact could also benefit each other too. Thus, extended contact, indirect contact provide an adequate framework to understand the normative influence. Here we got the idea that seeing my fellow friends having friendship with our group may guide my own behaviors. That's why normative influence play a role here. Indeed, it's the idea that behavior of the rest of the in-group extended contact will have a normative effect on my own behavior. There's a lot of evidence now coming out showing that in-group norms are an important aspect to consider when we are trying to understand behavior. Winifred's work for many years and many other folks are pushing regarding the norms and how important are when we need to consider whether we engage in contact or not, for instance. So norms should play a role in this picture too. What we know from norms, and I love so much these studies when I teach social psych, how important are group norms to guide our behavior, but particularly perceiving how much others approve our contact with my fellow group members could also influence the way we think. I like very much this study. I read it when I was doing my PhD with Rupert, the famous study of Wagner. But look, perceived approval of is regard norms, how much they, my fellow, approve. Or the work by Stefan and Stefan, Cookie and Walter Stefan, considering the idea of threat of anxiety is because of the fear that other in-group members would not approve such a contact. So learning from this very interesting research and this particular Journal of Social Issue paper that give us the idea that norms is something really important to consider. That's it, the number of in-group friends, in-group norms, in-group members that are known to observe to have positive cross-group friendship will change perception of the in-group norms. The main implication that in-group norms could change as a function of extended contact. So we cannot assume norms are rigid or static. If we manage to understand mechanisms that explain why norms could change over time, there we go. We have a way of influencing disposition to get in contact with our members and all the benefits of contact. So we put the attention on the norms and particularly regarding the influence of the extended contact. On the other hand, positive contacts could prepare people for future direct contact. That's exactly the hypothesis we're going to test in these studies. If my fellow friends got friends, that may imply me more motivated to engage in contact. So extended contact could also influence direct contact. A recent meta-analysis from a group of people working with Uli Wagner, Uma Lemmer, a colleague from you in Melbourne, did this very nice meta-analysis on intervention of positive contact involving extended and direct contact. I really advise you to read this paper. It's very nice, providing evidence of this. So our current research focuses on what we call injective norms, taking the idea of Cialdini. It means what other in-group members approve of. And this is particularly relevant in the school context in which immigrants and non-immigrant or host members are interacting in a daily basis. If my fellow friends approve me having contact with them, very important norm to consider. Obviously, this is not the only norm, as we know. On the other hand, we know John Berry has been very influential in many of us, and we focus attention with Rupert and Hannah Segevka for many years, researching in indigenous context, in immigrant context, from the minority perspective, majority perspective, longitudinal, experimental. Well, this model, as we know, is being very close, kind of cousin of the contact hypothesis. Even though I mentioned that there are not many studies connecting the two. I think it's a new trend during the last 10 years, but I would imagine it would be earlier, because that development is always connecting, as Rupert were introducing, that, for instance, integration means keeping my identity by the time I'm experiencing contact with the A group, with the host in this case. However, there are two important issues that we need to address in the literature regarding acculturation. First, acculturation originally focused attention mostly on immigrants, so it's from the minority perspective. But of course, members of the majority can also have preference about how they would like immigrants to live in their country. That's something that literature wasn't really focused attention for many years. Part of this conference here is focused attention on the majority. For political reason, if we don't change the majority perspective, it's a big problem for integration. So we need to think of how to address both minority and majority. Rupert already mentioned this. So we will focus attention on the majority perspective, in this case, Chileans. It doesn't mean the minority is not important, but this study is particularly focused on them. Second, the vast majority of studies have been concerned about consequences of acculturation preferences. What are the main consequences at the psychological level? Well-being, mental health, intergroup relation, bias. If people integrate, or you want to integrate them, then I feel less threatened, less prejudice, and so forth. Consequence of. However, they tend to conceptualize acculturation as a preference, as an independent rather than a dependent factor. There is an absence of studies regarding this predictor of acculturation preference. Why people at the end become motivated to integrate immigrants. Why they want them to assimilate. Why they want them to keep their culture or have contact with our group, our host society. So that's a very relevant question too. We've been learning a lot about consequence of contact. We were learning a lot consequence of acculturation. So this is a work that we're expecting to connect the two literature, but putting acculturation as our main dependent measure and contact as our main independent factor. So we will focus an antecedent of acculturation preference in two longitudinal studies. Despite this close conceptual relationship between process of acculturation and contact, we know the empirical relation remains quite unexplored. Specifically, we are going to test the relationship between integral friendship, direct contact, and indirect contact in predicting acculturation preference among majority members. Further, we ought to explore the mediational role of in-group norms, how the specific relationship between extended contact influence norms and norms influence attitudes, acculturation preference over time, longitudinally. So that's why we set up these two studies. So our main prediction is first that direct contact will increase support for acculturation preference. Being direct contact here, friendship, so it's a very high positive expression of contact. Secondly, we expect extended contact will be predicting change in norms. Thirdly, in-group norm will be mediating the relationship between extended contact and preference for contact and desire for acculturation preferences. And finally, we expect to see effect of the extended contact in direct contact over time. Thank you, Rufi, for advising the immigration context in Chile. Just give you the final recent figures. I took this picture from the newspaper. I found very nicely way to present it. I just want to highlight one thing. almost 2.3%. It's been increasing, but it's not a big proportion of the population. But in terms of the framing in the media, every week, every day, immigration issues are right there. So these social representation things are really influencing attitudes, people. One of the things that we talked to the Senate member was, look, there is not such a massive amount of immigrant changing or threatening the society as a whole. This is really small proportion. And obviously they are distributed in the country in different ways. So those who are arguing this huge mass movement towards Chile is not true. Those are actual data. However, psychologically, people experiencing this as a threat. And the media is really helping a lot on that respect. Connecting crime with immigrants, connecting social conflict within particular neighborhoods, and so forth. But because we are growing, we need to be serious about developing policy on this issue. So the two studies, the first one has got 645 Chilean adolescents, about 15 years old. These studies include 2 waves of 6 months, and there were recurring data in 4 neighborhoods in Santiago in which mostly the immigrant lives. We include measures that you are probably very familiar with, in-group friendship, how many of your Chilean friends have Peruvian friends. The way we measure norms, my Chilean friends value me, would be happy if I had Peruvian friends. My Chilean friends are friendly with Peruvian friends. If I have Peruvian friends, I think my Chilean friends will happy to meet them, and so forth. Supporting injecting norms. In terms of the acculturation, that was the traditional items we've been using several times regarding the one I want them to keep their culture, or I want them to have contact with us, the traditional measure of this acculturation process. In terms of the descriptive, just to show you a little bit, as you can see, our group friends, from the majority, there is not very much difference. However, there is a mean of indicating movement between non-friends to some friends. And extended context a little bit higher, but still no difference between time 1 and time 2, fairly stable. When we look at the acculturation preferences, they are much higher, and you can see preference for cultural maintenance and context are fairly high, suggesting the combination of high conditions, obviously more close to the interaction, the integration situation. And as you can see also, in-group norms are reflecting level, a stable level, but middle from 1 to 5 scale in the midpoint of the scale. So there is action there to explain if there is any action. So, very simple statistic consideration. We run analysis in M+. We use indicator average when we have more than 2 items. In the longitudinal model, we control for all dependent measure at time 1. For simplicity, we don't put this in the figure. And we control for all covariance with all time and 1 measure. So this is the expected model what we test. As you can see, we expect the more I have Peruvian friends that have Peruvian friends, the more I think they want me to have friends from them. And the more I perceive they want me, then I'm more willing Peruvians to keep their culture and have contact with us. That was the rationale for the extended. This is a normative relationship between extended and norms. We don't get this path here because conceptually we're expecting to change norm by perceiving how much they, my fellow in-group, influence my norms. Instead, we propose that what is being researched many times, that friendship should bring positive cultural maintenance and positive own preference for contact if we're talking about friendship. And that was exactly what we found, except for the effect of this direct effect. Extended contact did change, was related to perceiving a norm, which in turn predict longitudinally effect on culture maintenance and preference for contact. Remember, this is in time 2, and this is influencing time 1. Well, in the next study, we decided to expand this research and came back to the same areas, different samples, and we expand the number of months in which we include this measure. That's as a study that we've been working and replicating some of the measure Linda's been using in the US regarding Latinos and white students within school context. And remember, school contexts are really interesting place to research, because here we have many conditions in which we have daily based contact. But it could be the case, as we saw in the descriptive, none of them are simply interacting just with the in-group, and they are experiencing contact with others and declaring some positive interaction and friendship. So pretty much the same questions. We also include now in the extended contact Chilean friend outside the school too, which is another important aspect, because by just simply looking at the context in which you have kind of formal, inevitable contact, we want to see whether they experience contact outside the school with the A group. It could be the case they segregate again. So the acculturation preference, pretty much the same measure. So the descriptive, now you can see, against our own expectation, just the descriptive, number of A group friends went down. Not good news in terms of what we're expecting in contact. Obviously, there is no intervention here. Something was going on in the class, as well as extended contact, but no significant effect. When we look at the in-group norm, fairly high, which is really interesting. Remember here, we're seeing that my friends report having friends from the A group. Again, we didn't see difference here regarding the preference for culture method, but yes, from time one to another. So it's a little drop here and the same here. So at the very least, things were not having positive change over time. However, this is very descriptive, and we cannot assume that's happened for everyone. So the longitudinal analysis will let us know whether those changes are systematic or not. So again, the same statistic considerations. And here, because we have several factors and 3 waves, we use a cross-lag longitudinal analysis to explain and to test the very same prediction as the first results I show you. But unfortunately here, we're going to go into the spaghetti ball effect. Right. So don't get panic. It seems to be complex. But you can blame Oliver Chris. If you have any problem, I give you his email. But I'm following his suggestion in this complex analysis. This model is called the baseline model. And this is with unconstrained models. It means we just leave every single pattern to be free, no constraint at all. So that's the picture, controlling every covariance here within time for all the measure, and we estimate the path for all of this connection. Just roughly, you can see extended contact is positively relating changes in contact in time 2, which also influence acculturation preference in time 3. That was the effect we were looking at, and that's the effect we found in study 1. But this is over the times. Extended contact also influenced number of friends, extended contact. This cross-lag effect was also present. Now, for testing the model, we're going to constrain the model several times in order to test each of these paths and see whether the model holds after the number of constraints we include in the model, to be requiring a lot of evidence to hold the model as we expect. So those are the indirect effects that I mentioned. Then we took all this autoregressive, and you can see all are fixed now, and the model hold with the same high fit index and all the indicators that tell us that those paths, even when we fit them, the model still explains the same pattern. We had the same indirect effect of the extended contact as we were expecting. Then we fix all this effect now, and the cross-lag effect, and the model still hold. Again, we consistently find the extended contact effect, lucky us, because otherwise it would imply we lost the connection. Then we add the final path to the model, as long as you can see all these dark arrows are indicating the pattern of results. So every model is increasing the complexity until we reach the final model in which we test all our main predictions. So that connection, extended change in norms, nor influence in acculturation was there. Norm instead is affecting the acculturation as it is here. This cross-lag effect also hold over the measure in time. Finally, if you look at all the models from the baseline to the different models in which we start constraining all the path, you can see the drop in the indices is very low, so we can rely on the final, more complex and more difficult model for us in which we can address all our main predictions. We also test the reverse model. Even though the fit were quite high, you can see many of these paths are gone now. So we stick and rely on the more systematic model the other way around. So we confirm our main predictions regarding extended contact, extended influence change over time on acculturation by influencing Ingram norms, which is a very relevant aspect to consider if we're thinking an intervention. Ingram norms mediate the relationship between extended contact and acculturation over time. On the other hand, according to our fourth hypothesis, extended contact was a very important precursor of cross-group friendship. So by seeing my friends hanging around with other Peruvian friends, influenced my own disposition to become friends with Peruvian, which is very cool, especially in context of kids learning and enjoying classes, having contact on a daily basis. The opposite pattern, cross-group friendship leading to change on extended contact, also hold. So it's just not extended on friendship, but the other way around too, though the first path is stronger than the other one. So it's a dynamic process between contact and direct contact and changing our norms and acculturation preferences. This model needs to be tested in immigrants. As you would imagine, did we measure immigrants? Of course we did. Why I'm not presenting them? Well, the model didn't work. And I've been trying several models with several longitudinal studies, and somehow even got 300 participants, didn't work. So we really need to find maybe different factors, different explanation. Obviously, this presentation is focused on the majority, but the minority was there, and we didn't test, we didn't find systematically the same pattern. Positive contact are typically weaker for minority groups. We know from the literature. And we need to put attention on this particular immigrants, because the minority who also experience a great deal of discrimination, as Linda and other fellows are being showing, is very important to consider. We know that this criticism of the contact hypothesis that minorities maybe perceive less discrimination, show less support for collective action. That's a very important issue to address here. Now, for policy implications, the importance of fostering this development of cross-group friendship in multi-ethnic schools is relevant. We know contact is being criticized in many respects. Some of these criticisms are really important for us to learn and to defeat them if we change or find way of new research, as we are doing now. But what we learn from these very specific studies, friendships really play a role, and extended contact too. Particularly in this context in which we can see interaction between kids on a daily basis. This is relevant also because shaping Ingram norms is a very interesting way of stimulating attitudes toward acculturation. So we just need to let students get friends and see the benefit of this. Muchas gracias.